Well, good afternoon and welcome to MedTech Crossroads. I'm Gene Paranak. Today is our 34th episode. It is Friday, November 6th, and we have a fun show for you today. We posted something live earlier and said the only valid excuse for not being here today is working on your tan because it is beautiful out there. So I hope you all have a wonderful weekend coming up. Today on the show, first of all, we're going to retrace COVID Connect because we are going to look at the numbers in the state of Michigan, talk about that. After that, my first guest is going to be Kevin McLeod from C2Dx. We're going to be talking about divestitures of existing medical products and building a thriving business around that. After that, we're going to say a few words about surviving the next steps in device development and the role that complexity, identifying and understanding complexity plays in your medical device development process. And after that, we'll have time for Q&A and audience announcements. But with that, I want to take you on to the national graph of COVID hospitalizations. If you've listened to COVID Connect and MedTech Crossroads, you know that I personally have a preference for looking at hospitalizations. There's many numbers we can look at, but hospitalizations is a real indicator of impact on a community. And nationally, you remember that there were two peaks, and now we're looking at a third peak. And of course, what's interesting about that is when you look regionally at the country, that first peak was almost entirely the Northeast and a little bit of the Midwest. The second peak was the South and the West. But what's really unique right now is that all the areas are coming back up. So this third peak truly is, if you will, the second peak nationally, and it truly is coming up in all areas. And again, these are hospitalizations. These are not the deaths or the cases. If we look at Michigan as a state, these four charts that we've seen before, the daily tests, which have been increasing ever since April, the daily cases, the currently hospitalized, and the daily deaths. And just a couple notes here that tell some very interesting stories. One is that the true daily cases were likely much higher way back in the spring, because we can see that the hospitalizations would tend to trace the cases, but we weren't doing enough tests back in the spring. And that, thankfully, is much higher these days. We also have to do a shout out to our hospital systems in the state of Michigan, our practitioners, many of whom have been on the show and talked to us in the early days about what was happening. We're going to start doing that again. In fact, next week, Dr. Philip Levy from Wayne State University is going to be joining us to talk about the COVID situation in the state of Michigan. But we do have to give a shout out to our practitioners. I think it's pretty clear from the uptick in hospitalizations, but the still relatively low deaths, that our hospital systems have learned a lot since spring. So we want to give a shout out to all those frontline workers in the hospitals who have learned so much and done so much and put so much on the line to take care of people. And you can see the fruit of their labors in that reduced death count that we're seeing now. So we're very thankful for our hospital staff. One more note regionally in the state, really interesting here, hat tip to my friend Steve Minus for pointing out this site run by the University of Michigan. If you look for the last week in COVID cases across the state, of course, you're going to see two hotspots, one in Metro Detroit and one in Metro Grand Rapids areas. But those are where the population centers are. If you look per capita, this is where it gets really interesting. Southeast Michigan, where it had hit so hard in the spring, per capita, not as high as the UP and Grand Rapids area, where I don't think it had hit quite as hard in the spring, and we're now seeing that per capita hit on the west side and the north side of the state. One last slide here, because we told you that if there was COVID news, we were going to bring it to you, and that is the statewide hospital capacity report for the entire state. Not a lot to say here yet, except that we are seeing the adult ICU bed occupancy trending upwards compared to the number of available ICU beds. So don't know where this is going to go, but hopefully next week we'll have a view of this from our friend Dr. Philip Levy from Wayne State University, who will be joining us on the show. So we're looking forward to having him. That's the COVID news for today. Next up, I want to bring on our first guest, and if I can get the screen sharing to stop. Our first guest today is Kevin McLeod from C2Dx. Kevin's joining us live on the show today. Kevin, it's good to have you.
Thanks for having me, Gene. Honored to be here.
Yeah, it's
Nothing,
always good to.
nothing like following a pandemic and graphs of death. I feel like I'm in the right place.
We're glad to have you. We're glad that the community can come together and talk about whatever is important. And Kevin, you've been such a central part of this community for so many years, from your early days at Stryker, where you did marketing, sales, business development, and you worked internationally out of Switzerland for them. Then you ran Southwest Michigan first as an accelerator there in Kalamazoo. Then you took Impact Athletic and you grew it up as a business and sold it to Rogers Athletic 4 years ago. And here you are doing C2Dx, and we want to talk about a number of things today. But you're running that as the founder and CEO. You've been a very busy guy over the years.
Yeah. I was. I learned well back in my first days at Stryker that there's only one way to get things done, and that's work hard, work a lot, and try to find balance in it all. So it's been fun.
I've found over the years that people either get into medical devices and they love it and their passion is there, or they go away because it can be a very, very hard business, especially on the startup side and all over the business. What's the passion that keeps you doing this? And in fact, you went from the big business, from things like Stryker, into the startups, and that's, we could call you a glutton for punishment. I think rightly by that. What's the passion that keeps you doing this, Kevin?
Yeah, it's craziness a little, but I think ultimately, it's funny when I started at Stryker. This is going to sound like I used to walk uphill through the snow to school stories, but ultimately when we started, it was a very entrepreneurial spirit. And this was early '90s when I started there right out of school, and we had it then, and that's really what has driven me ever since then. Is that the journey towards growth and towards new. I've always been really excited by the shiny new toy, and having that opportunity to do that inside Stryker was remarkable. But then, taking the step, and a very large step, into entrepreneurial side of things and startups. Certainly, I've made a lot of mistakes, learned from them, and moved on. But this is truly where I think I was meant to be in providing team culture and leadership, and then taking chances on some opportunities.
Yeah, my parents always told me that I always like to take shiny new toys apart just to see how they worked. It's a thing that I think a lot of us in this industry have in common.
See, I'm just not smart enough to put them back together, Gene.
Well, I didn't say I was either. Right? So I always like to ask my guests, what is the story you have to tell over and over when people encounter, maybe they're new to the device industry and they haven't seen it before. What's a story that you find yourself having to tell over and over again in this area?
So yeah, that's a good one. I think, there's two things I always talk about specific to medical devices and specific to me. The first I would get into is going back to my early days at Stryker. But when I started, it was we were there at 6 a.m. and you were there with your tie on, and you usually were there. If you got there at 6, you were there probably 20 to 30 minutes after John Brown showed up. And, we learned a lot as a 22, 23-year-old showing up at 6 a.m. and being able to function and really learn leadership through this culture that was very driven. But over time, and this is where it turns in sort of my story and some of the story where Stryker is today, is that you learn how to do things differently. You didn't necessarily always have to be the guy there with the tie on at 6 a.m. or you didn't have to follow this vanilla a blueprint. We really started to grow when we looked at things differently and be able to take some chances. And that's where I was able to have some success at Stryker, was looking at different products than other people might not have done that. And, Neptune waste management system is a perfect example where you just had to take some chances. So that story of being able to look outside the norm and do things a little differently. And specific to medical devices, the story I like to tell, and the reason I love this business, is that the FDA piece of our business is often looked at, and it's like a 4-letter word at the end of the day, but I've always looked at it as this natural barrier of entry, that if you understand it and you know how to live within it, and you comply within it, it is a wonderful barrier that just, everyone just can't show up. And I didn't appreciate that more until I had a startup outside of the FDA guidance and any quality management systems. It seemed like heaven when I could change the product today and ship it tomorrow. But at the end of the day, some of the issues of not having a great quality management system really came to light. So I'm a fan of it. I think it's, at the end of the day, our motto from day one here at C2Dx is our passion for excellence saves lives. And that's, I think that's all driven through this ability to create in a very controlled atmosphere and be able to do things differently.
It's interesting. You describe sort of this fear that people sometimes have and your willingness to step outside the box. And you said you learned that at Stryker, and it can be hard to learn that inside of a big company. I know when we talked before, you described yourself as sort of this inside versus outside the regiment, the person who marches along doing what the big organization sort of expects, not stepping out of line, versus someone who learns to take a little step out of line and try something. How did you learn that inside a company? Because I think oftentimes the pressure is just there to just do it the way that the company does it. How does one learn that, even if one is inside a large company?
I think first of all, it's got to be that risk failure gene has to be inside you. I think you have to be willing to take chances. And I'm not sure. I don't know if you've had anybody from Stryker on, at least back in those days, Gene. I don't think so. But so I'm going to take this opportunity to tell you how I saw it. But it was an unbelievable group of individuals with some great leadership at the time, and we were given enough rope to really do damage. If at the end of the day, if you failed, you may not have a job, and we felt that way. But it was that bound a lot of people. But for those of us who embraced that change, didn't mind a little risk, it really gave a chance to shine. And that's where I had my failures there, but at the end of the day, we had an unbelievable team that could support you if you're willing to take that risk. And we were measured. Everything was measured, and we celebrated the measurement. But at the end of the day, if you weren't willing to take a step outside that norm, you potentially were just going to be part of the organization that didn't move forward. Not that that's bad, but I think ultimately, if you wanted to build your career in an accelerated pace, you took chances. So that's, and when you fell, the great thing is if you were looked at as doing the right things, taking the right chances, you still had that safety net. If you were a cowboy that went out on their own, probably didn't have a job. So it was, and it was, I often describe, and specifically Stryker Instruments is where I spent the bulk of my time, is that, at the end of the day, it was just a bunch of people trying to get things done and trying to do things the right way.
It takes a lot on the part of leadership to give that level of freedom and accountability, right? Because absolute freedom is not what we're looking for here, but also so much pressure from the top that you're not allowed to take those risks. That sounds like a good balance that was had. Now, you've got some interesting practices. We're going to talk about the company here in a minute, but you've got some interesting practices inside of C2Dx that you described as a failure analysis report. And I thought this was so cool. We got to hear about this, and we've all got to do this in our companies. If you're listening, you have to take this idea and you've got to do it inside of your companies. But tell us about the failure analysis report.
Yeah, so I have to be, we call it our FAR, and sometimes an extra letter is added to there depending on how the situation arises. But ultimately, we were looking at ways to define culture. So this passion for excellence saves lives, that the concept, that motto, that that culture that we're driving, that was easy. But it's, what else are you looking to do? Well, we're a startup. Obviously, we want to grow. And what we're trying to encourage is the growth in trying things new. If you're not trying, you're failing. And that's, and I'm a big fan of the Confucius, who said it originally. It's not I can't quote it exactly, but it's not not the fear of falling, but the fear of standing up, or so. I'm getting it wrong, but ultimately you have to be willing to fall down if you're going to pick yourself back up. So our FAR is during our weekly meeting, people will talk about a failure they had the previous week. It could be personal, it could be professional, but at the end of the day, we talk about it, we learn from it, and we move on. And I think we're not trying to celebrate failure, because I think you can get caught up in that a little too much, and it feels like that you almost sensationalize it. But what we're trying to do is learn from failure, but encourage trying. And that's the way we look at it. And we also describe our culture as working out loud. I mean, we definitely, nobody is out of line. Everybody has a place to have a piece in the discussion. And it's easy to do at a 15 employee company, but what we're serious about growth. So we want to make sure this is, part of the inner linings of the organization, so that it carries through with our growth. So we're very, very, we're outward living. We're very critical of one another when we need to be, but we're also quick to celebrate.
That's awesome. Yeah, and like you said, it's not the goal isn't there to celebrate failure per se, but to allow the transparency. And I know, as you and I talked previously, you're the one who sort of leads with that and is willing to be transparent, and that's just such a great example. Well, we've gone this far, but we haven't really heard much about C2Dx, and I want people to understand what compartment syndrome is, what the diagnosis of compartment syndrome is, and then maybe we can get a little bit into this really unique business model, because so many of us, when we think of a new company, we're thinking, oh, we're going to take academic research and we're going to translate it, or we've got this great idea. You guys have a totally different business model, and I think it's one that deserves a lot of attention that I want to get into with you here. But I'd love to know more about compartment syndrome and the origins of C2Dx.
Yeah, well, I'd start with the origins of the company. It's actually it's a pretty neat story, a very Michigan story. And so I had just we had sold our technology to Rogers Athletic, and I was spending my time working with Rogers Athletic. But when that was coming to an end, I had the opportunity I got a call from a good friend from Stryker, who is he and I actually met when we moved our families to Switzerland together. So when Jamie called me, Jamie Kemmler is what I'm talking about. So Jamie said, "Hey, you're going to get a call from a gentleman named Ian Bunt." And having been in the entrepreneurial side of things, I'd heard of Ian, but had never spoken to Ian before. So I picked up the call from Ian, and it took about 1 minute to realize that he was trying to confidentially talk to about a product that I knew from 25 years earlier when I was the product manager for it. So
Small world.
Yeah. So it was a really neat start. And those of you who know Ian, or even if you don't know Ian, he's a remarkable man. And he's also a remarkable businessman. So we hit it off very quickly, and had the opportunity to start building the team. And I had kept in touch with some former colleagues who I have a ton of respect for. And fortunately, they were able to listen to me and take the risk with me. And so our head of operations is Amy Paparanic, was 28 years at Stryker. Our head of engineering and R&D, Rick Heiser, 27 years at Stryker. Our chief growth officer, Cynthia Ansari, was 17 years at Stryker. And I was there 17 years. So our first 4 employees had, over 80-ish years of medical device experience right away. So really talented, driven in a culture I knew very well, with a product that I was very familiar with. So sounds like instant success, right? But it definitely, we had a decent start. Our first year was good, not great. But we were we spent heavily on infrastructure. We knew that the whole concept of this organization was going to be to grow, is to have an amazing culture and grow the company. So we spent, our EQMS system was, we probably overspent for that for one first year company. Our CRM, our ERP, we definitely made sure that the company was built to grow, and was also built to run from anywhere, which, 14 months later, who knew that we would have to be running it from anywhere, including our basements. So it worked out really well. So we rounded out the team. We're fortunate through Ian and Plymouth Growth Partners to meet Jen Brandt, who's our CFO. She actually is the only one on the team who's taken a med device company from beginning to end. She was with New Step out of Dr. Sarn's organization in Ann Arbor. Jen's been phenomenal. Then our last add on our executive team, Ryan Eggleston, was another Stryker veteran. So very heavy Stryker, trying not to be too heavy Stryker. in case people get a little confused about what culture we're trying to build here, but we're very fortunate. So the product is the STIC, S-T-I-C, intracompartment pressure monitor system. Fortunately, most of us don't know what compartment syndrome is because we or a loved one haven't had it. But compartment syndrome, the best way for me, a layperson, to explain it is that it is as close to an emergency orthopedic procedure as there is. Meaning that if it doesn't happen, there's catastrophic events. So compartment syndrome, our body has compartments, which is essentially sacs filled with fluid, if you will. If they're compressed during a fracture, so tibia fracture, it's compound, the bone presses up against this compartment, the compartment will blow up like a balloon. And if they don't catch it in time, and in time means sometimes within 15 minutes, there's a potential loss of blood flow and nerve damage, which can result in amputation or syndromes like drop foot. So very urgent. Majority of medical students in the United States, at least, are trained on it. Certainly, orthopedics surgeons are all trained on it and all very aware of the syndrome and the diagnostic tools that exist. So the STIC intracompartment pressure monitor was introduced to the market in 1988 and has been the gold standard since about the time it was released in diagnosing this. So we were fortunate that that we were able to be able to get this from Stryker, and it's I guess kind of segueing into the whole divestiture model, but the product itself is #1 market share in the world, and we're able to really have a wonderful tool to go in and talk to physicians about as a startup. So we're very, very lucky and spoiled to some extent to have it, but the having it was an interesting come about. So Stryker is at, depending on the division they're at, their portfolios all have different life cycles, but Stryker historically has not been a company that's done a lot of divestitures. So Jamie Kemmler's role inside the organization is to look for IP to sell, and something like the STIC monitor, most people wouldn't understand the true value of the product, but fortunately I did, having sold it and being the product manager for it. But what this gives us is this a product with the #1 market share that lets us get into hospitals. And as a startup, you can have the greatest widget in the world, but if you can't get past the gatekeepers at materials management or the head of OR or wherever you're selling, you have a tough time showing how great your widget is. So we don't have that barrier. We're able to have a conversation very quickly. So we've onboarded 20 customers a week since the week we started. So it's been very we've been very fortunate that this product would allow us to do this. But the value inside Stryker diminishes over time because of the rest of the product. We've gotten a little bigger since 1988. So products like this are not getting the attention that it might deserve. So this gives us that opportunity to come in and acquire a product and dust it off a little bit. And that's exactly what we've done. So we've given it a little new life. We've changed some things that we knew needed to be changed. It's things as small as putting a QR code on it, so that at the point of care, people can scan the QR code and take you right to our how-to video. Something that we heard for years at Stryker, but when it's a small product line, you just don't want to take the time and effort when you could do it to your $500 million product line. So it's been great for us, and Stryker has got a lot of other products like that. And our job now in this whole divestiture strategy is to start thinking about how we could do this again. And it's been hasn't been without its challenges. Year 2 has been really good to us, even with the COVID situation. Our product's not used for COVID, but fortunately it's used even during times where things like a pandemic exist. It's a trauma product. So we've still had a good year in I guess in a situation that nobody could have ever predicted. So now we're just really focused on number 2. So we're out looking very hard to divest another product, and we're talking to Stryker, Boston Scientific. We've talked to ConMed, Hologic, every company that essentially we have a former colleague at really. But we've looked at a lot of places to find that. U of M, Thomas Martin, we've talked to Thomas. So we're definitely at our tentacles out as far as we can, because that's the strategy, is to do it again and again, and each one will get hopefully exponentially bigger.
It's a really fascinating strategy. And I think many people aren't aware of how many large companies have product lines that are making money, but they're not maybe the big shiny new toy for that size of a company. And they'd like to see the product continue, and they don't have any good ways to clear their decks for the new things that they want to do. How do you referenced your access into the hospitals. Did that access come along with the product line? Did those channels come along with the product line? Or is that something that you guys had specific expertise in, that you had the access anyways, and so now you're able to leverage it as you grow and change and shift this product line?
So yes and yes. So
okay.
So we did inherit. I mean, these customers existed, and it's a base capital model. So the monitor itself is in these institutions, and then they had to continue to buy the disposable from us. That said, it was, and we still see it today, where they'll call Stryker to get the product that they haven't ordered in a while, and they forgot that a new company. So the difficulty for us is getting people to us. Because the reality is we don't want them turning to a competitor. So we've spent a lot of effort, social media, LinkedIn, things like LinkedIn and Facebook, and direct marketing, going to meetings, just trying to make sure that the institutions and the orthopedic physicians know where this product is. So it's been, and we call in the emergency room and the operating room. So you really have to make sure both groups you touch base with both, because you're not sure who's going to order it. But, and of course we had the expertise, because Cynthia is, 17 years in sales, in marketing in the space. I had 17 years of sales marketing in the space. So we both knew how to do it. And then we brought on, our model early was to, we hired we have 3 direct reps, but we wanted to use agents that were already out in the field. So we've been very fortunate to find, as of last week, 6 of our agents are actually former colleagues of ours at Stryker, who now have their own local distributorships. So they all sold the product before. So it's this Stryker has served me in a lot of ways, and it continues to serve me with the relationships we continue to have. And that's what it's going to boil down to, is familiarity with the space, both in products, in the customer side, as well as other colleagues in the market.
You're painting a picture of many moving parts, many of which you've been able to put in place solutions for, and folks with experience and things like that. What are you talked earlier about natural barriers to entry in the med device industry. It's one of the good things about it from a competitive standpoint. Now, you were with Stryker. That was a background you had. There's a lot of connections there. But if we back up and we ask, so there's a company that wants to go and do divested products, but maybe they didn't have that background with the company. What are the natural barriers to entry that they're going to have to think about? This access to the hospital is one of them. What other things do you not just walk in and do that you guys have had to overcome, whether by connections or by innovation?
Yeah, so pulling it out of an organization is, you're pulling the sales, the marketing, the regulatory, the finance, the manufacturing. You're pulling the whole thing. So, for us, day one, we sort of made our priority. What do we want to do? Do we want to set up operations? Do we want to manufacture the product? No. Where are we going to go? So we talked to Patrick Miller in Plymouth. We talked to MedBio up in Grand Rapids. But we settled on Jim Metzger with Keystone here locally because A, they were local, B, they had a clean room that we knew could grow with us, and we wanted a long-term partner. And so that's the and by the way, here's a little ad for Jim and Keystone. They've been phenomenal, and part of that success is because they've let us run pieces of the project when they knew we knew more. And I think that's been important in our relationship. So you look at all these things and what comes with it. And we had to move the operations we had earmarked within 9 months. Otherwise, those customers that have been buying for Stryker for 30 years wouldn't be buying it from us anymore because we wouldn't have product on the shelf. So big pucker event day one, right? We had to move the operations up from Puerto Rico to Kalamazoo and get it up and running again. So kudos to Jim and the team. We got it done in 6 months. So those are the little things. You have to build a business from scratch, even though you have a product that's 30 years old, and make sure you understand what it takes. We screwed up. We literally forgot to mention Health Canada approval. We just, we knew we were going to have to go out and get the CE mark on our own, but Health Canada, we could have transferred with the sign of a pen, but we missed it. So it took us 12 months to get into Canada. So those little things, you learn from them, failures, analysis, and make sure you understand. So there's no shortcuts with starting the company. There is a shortcut into revenue if you do things right. And you have to, but the pressure is, Plymouth and Ian didn't invest in a company that only did what we bought. The idea is to grow from it. Otherwise, you don't get your money back at some point. So that's been our focus day one: transfer the product and the customer successfully, and look for avenues to grow the product line. And then, our goal all along has been within 18 months find another product. So far, so good. We've had a good run.
And you're looking for other places to get those products and looking around. That's a really cool model. I want to ask our audience, if you have any questions for Kevin, you can raise your hand virtually in the Zoom meeting. We would love to have your questions for Kevin. Ken Spencer, you're live with us.
Yeah, so Kevin, this is a really interesting model. Are you familiar with Accuray cytometers?
Just by name.
Yeah, so
I am familiar with it. Yep.
So Becton Dickinson acquired them, right? And Jen Baird was the CEO there. And
yeah, I've met Jen.
Yep. And my understanding is that Becton Dickinson has done everything they can to screw up that product line. So.
Also not uncommon.
Yeah, so just throw that out there. Because
I appreciate it.
It was very successful for a while. The other one was, do you remember Health Media in Ann Arbor?
I don't know that one.
So Johnson & Johnson acquired them, I'm going to say like 2008 or something like that, for several $100 million there. And they totally shut them down. So Ted Dacko is the local Ann Arbor contact there. He would know all about that. It's a software-based thing, so I don't know if that's in your bailiwick or not. But
well, it's a great, to answer that question. It's certainly, we're hoping it to be. It's not. We're really interested in some telehealth or some sort of advanced technology, because to augment our divestiture strategy. So, our hope is to get a couple divestitures and then add something that's different, unique, that we can actually grow at a different pace.
Cool. And if I could ask one more question. So, and this is in a different area, when you talk about working out loud, could you expound a little bit more on that, on what you do there?
Yeah. So in this, ultimately, this group of individuals has the right and the ability to weigh in on any topic at any time. So it's not the Wild West by any stretch, but we want to encourage. So we've got folks with 30 years now of experience in medical devices, and we got folks with actually 2 months experience out here. So, but the ones with 2 months are able to bring aspects, relationships, experiences, even at this early stage. So we make sure they know that they're able to weigh in, to have an opinion. They're also going to, on the flip side, but they're going to have to take the lumps the way the rest of us do. So everyone is encouraged to get involved, to have an opinion. So during a weekly meeting, everyone talks, everyone gets the piece in, everyone is able to contribute. We do the sort of normal team building stuff with book clubs and we're willing to listen to learn from anybody, and there doesn't have to be a formal event either. It's if there's something that could change or need to change, or someone's got an idea, they're certainly encouraged to do so. And I think you can see in my office, people aren't afraid to come in and write on your walls at times either. So how do you move the needle and really make a difference? And nobody should wait to do so.
That's cool. In my startups, we had a thing called carefrontation, which was
it's good.
Very similar approach to life. So anyway, well, thank you. Congratulations.
I might steal that one.
Okay.
I like that.
Carefrontation.
Yeah, that's good.
Spencer, thank you for the questions. I think we're going to make Ken the honorary chairman of MedTech Crossroads. Always great contributions. Thank you, Ken. We'll give it a minute for any other questions we might have for Kevin here. You have it while we're waiting for that. Question that keeps coming to my mind is, would you have done this if you didn't have the relationships previously with Stryker? If someone were considering a divestiture model, it's sort of a hard question to ask, because you did have the relationships. They've created a great and a thriving business for you. And so it's sort of an unfair question. But if someone were considering this direction, which needs to be considered in our communities, what kind of connections do you need to have going in the door for this?
I mean, of course, here comes my ego, but I would have done it either way. I mean, it's really about understanding product, understanding market, understanding the opportunity, right? So that was my job at Stryker. That's what I excelled at Stryker, is finding products that we could sell. And at this stage, with the right team, we're looking at, we're meeting new people and looking for ideas. I mean, what Ken just offered up a couple of ideas. We've looked at over 275 now companies, ideas, or products over the last 12 months, looking for that, and certainly didn't know majority of the people involved or the products. So, if you're going back to when it started, I would have listened to Ian Bund no matter what, because of his reputation, and I would have trusted that the opportunity was good, and then I would have had to have done my homework. But yeah, I would have taken a swing. But I've already kind of laid out my intelligence level on this. I've done some pretty stupid things, but it's ultimately that lack of trying that gets you in trouble.
Looks like we got a question here from Desiree Haley.
Hi, everyone. Hi. Thank you so much. I appreciate the information, and the divesting is sort of a new idea for me. Of course, I'm at an early stage startup company trying to bring to market a device for drop foot.
Oh, interesting.
I suffered bone sarcoma and ended up with several reconstructed pelvis and surgeries, et cetera, and the result was drop foot. So I thought that was really interesting. I really appreciate the product that you have brought to market. And like you said earlier, some people, or I think Jean said, some people are kind of like really passionate about certain topics and certain medical devices, and then other one, sometimes when I've presented, it's just sort of a but I appreciate the passion that you have for that, and I live it on a daily basis. And so the issue that I've had is the stage that I am is looking for investors, trying to develop this product. And the idea of the divesting, what stage do you have to be at? What level do you have to be at in your startup to even have an opportunity to present this or have a company be interested in
divesting your concept, for instance?
Yeah.
Again, remember, this is one man's opinion. So, but I did have some experience. Gina actually talked about it when I first left Stryker. Southwest Michigan first gave me the opportunity to have a small incubator accelerator where we had a little budget, and we were trying to move it along, move concepts along. So I've seen a lot of early stage ideas and some great entrepreneurs throughout the state. And the one thing that seemed to ring true and continued to happen is that there's no perfect time or no right time for an idea to be acquired. Typically, especially now, companies like Stryker are going to want to see a track record of actual revenue. Companies, Stryker, Medtronic, ConMed, Hologic, all these Boston, all these big companies have more money, they have time. So they would rather pay you 10 times X versus putting the time and effort to do the R&D today. It's just easier for them. So, there's also there's mid-level companies that want to see it earlier in its life cycle. So they want to actually add their spin and be able to contribute to the clinical study or the regulatory approval process. So there's not one single answer. There's a spectrum of answers for that. But for my advice has always been just keep moving it and keep moving it any way you can. Find the right investors. Look for non-dilutive funding. There's some great organizations. MEDC has been a part of some in the past. The Right Place, Southwest Michigan First. There's a lot of organizations in the state that have helped us. Entrepreneurs, including MishBio. So don't stop. Do what it takes, and realize that when the right time comes along, they'll probably be knocking on your door, most likely.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you, Gene.
Thank you, Desiree. Thank you, Kevin. Good answer. We have a question here from Paul Reiser, a friend over at TechTown. He said, Kevin, thinking about the state of Michigan's med device entrepreneurial ecosystem as a whole, and you can do that. You're qualified to do that. So we get to ask you this question. What do you see as our top 2 strengths and top 2 challenges or gaps that we need to fill to grow competitively and thrive in the national medical and healthcare market? Great question, Paul. Over to Kevin. What do you think? What are the top 2 strengths and top 2 challenges or gaps that we have as an ecosystem here in Michigan?
Strengths far and away are the people. Obviously it's not a cop-out, Paul. When I say that, I think ultimately the engineers, the research organization. I mean, very few people probably realize the number of patents the U of M kicks out every year. They're top 10 every year. And then the engineering, what the automotive industry has done for the state of Michigan is built a lasting history of people who grind and they discover and they create. And I think that's what's been, just let me go on the record. I was born here. I went to Hope College here. I worked the majority of my life here, got a chance to live in a few other places. So I'm a little biased, but what I've seen is that the work ethic and the ingenuity and the integrity of people in the state of Michigan are far and away our assets. So I'm going to claim that as 3, Paul, right there. But I think, but what it's done is built an infrastructure. So that talent has built an infrastructure of engineering, manufacturing capabilities. Where we're short are things more creative side. So, being able, and this is actually starting to happen more and more, that forever at Stryker, my friends there would leave the minute they left Stryker. If something happened and they were going to move, instantly move. That's actually not happening as much anymore. The folks are moving to West Michigan and realizing, this is a pretty good place to raise a family. How do I stay? So, so that the one of our weaknesses is the ability to keep talent here with opportunities, but I think it's slowly getting better. The other thing is we've not kicked out ideas well enough. And Thomas Martin, if he's on this call, is probably shaking his head right now, or nodding his head, I should say. But we need to do better. And this is this is a divestiture story too, right? I mean, we need to keep ideas here and grow them in different ways, and keep the influence in the state of Michigan. It's just tough. And I think there's Thomas. But I think ultimately we need to do a better job. And I'm part of the we. I mean, we need to figure out a way to keep ideas here and grow them here, because we have talent, integrity, and ingenuity. And if we can continue to do that, or figure out a better way to continue to do that, I think the med device community here will be to rival the Massachusetts, the Minnesota, the northern Southern California areas. We just, the reality is a bunch of those people out there running those companies were probably from the Midwest. And I'm again a little biased here, but that's just how I see it. Sorry about the train. We don't pay a lot for rent, Gene, so we have to sit on the train tracks here. It's
That's another thing about Midwest companies I've noticed.
That's
We just scrap it and we make it happen.
That's
Comment
right.
from Tom. Yes, I am. Good to have you on the show today, Tom. Yeah, this is really cool. Great answers. Paul says thanks so much. I liked the response. So I think you passed the test there, Kevin. Paul likes your response. So no, I totally agree though. Give us some parting thoughts, Kevin. C2Dx is looking for its next thing. You guys have successfully taken your first divestiture from Stryker and turned it into a thriving business. Give us some parting thoughts for this community.
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks. I think I'm honored to be on it. I'm honored to be a part of this community. I think we've got some great people, and I was very fortunate to while running that accelerator for Southwest Michigan First is to meet a lot of you. And Gene, you and I met while I was doing that, and a number of the folks on the call. The reality is, and this is going back to Paul's questions, is that we do have a talented group. We do have a very tight knit, actually, med device community. I think everyone is willing to share and to move forward. And I just encourage everyone to continue to do that as I sort of pay it back a little bit. And, we can continue to get bigger and be a more impressive med device community if we continue to do that. And I think that's the biggest thing I hope for, because I more than anything else, I want to live and work in a community that I feel good about. And oftentimes in the past, if I wanted to, I can tell you, when I was leaving Stryker, if I didn't go to Southwest Michigan First, I would have left Michigan. With the opportunities I had were not here. So I don't want people to leave anymore. I want people from Stryker to leave Stryker and have a job at C2Dx or MedBio or Sun Medical, any of those companies we can continue to do so. So I don't know if that's wisdom, parting thoughts, or just a plea, but I think we just need to continue to invest in ourselves and feel good about what we're doing.
Well, we're thankful you stayed, and the state is better off for it. And now we have this product line back out there and thriving. Kevin, thanks for being with us today.
That was great, Gene. I'm glad to do it. Thank you.
Kevin McLeod. Love those stories. Well, we're going to actually postpone the presentation on surviving the next step because we'll want to get you all out of here at 3 o'clock if we can, and we'll spend a few more than 10 minutes on that. What we're going to do, though, is like we do every week. If you have an effort that you want to tell the community about, this is going to be recorded. It's going to go up on YouTube. You get to have that ensconced. If there's an effort that you are working on that you want the community to know about, some event that everyone should show up at, Diane Bowie the other week came on and said, hey, Gene, can I? Yep, yes, absolutely. Tell us about what's happening in your world. If you've got a hand to raise there in the Zoom room, feel free to do that. We always give a little while here in case anyone has an event you want to mention or an effort or a question. Maybe there's something that we've covered on the show before that you'd like to ask about. We'd be happy to try to address it right here. So we'll give just a few seconds for that. I want to mention also that Dr. Philip Levy is going to be our guest next week talking about what on earth is going on with COVID. We'd like to hear from him, and it's going to be a great time with Dr. Philip Levy from Wayne State University. Well, not seeing any questions or any announcements, I want to thank you for being here today on MedTech Crossroads. Hope you have a beautiful weekend. It's supposed to be a great weekend. We'll talk to you next Friday. Talk soon.